just, these pieces of wood came from just a mill out at Corner Bay, and I cut them to length, so they're exactly the same length. So that part's not a problem, although a little bit of sanding on the edge, because one edge was already cut and I just left it alone. But the cut in between here, this is the quote-unquote factory cut from the sawmill, but it's still not perfect. And when you see, you line this thing up, you can see there's a little bit of a gap, and there's just no way. I could sand a little here and I could sand a little there, but there's no way you could get it perfect. So I made a form basically on this grid. It's got to be lifted up so I can run the skill saw through it, lifted it up with a cut. There's room to cut right through the center, but if I cut right down the center, it'll take a little off this board, take a little off that board, and give me a final straight edge. So I gotta finish doing this, but basically I gotta make a form where I hold it in place, use this to make sure it's nice and level and there's no wobble here. And once I get it set, I screw these pieces into place, screw it in here, and that way it's tight side to side and it's tight on the edge, end to end. And once I get it in place, then I'll run my saw right down the groove, and if I do it right, I'll get a way better edge when I'm all done. So to get these two pieces of wood joined together, you can see they're the same thickness, same length, approximately the same width, but I had to join them together. Once I made the cut in between to get a straight edge, as straight edge as possible, then I had to actually separate them and then make this form. So you can see I actually locked the things in place, and I took this board and made a form in between that's set, can't move, and then I drilled, it's 2 inches thick board, so I drilled 1 inch up, drilled pilot holes, and these holes go straight in to the board right here. And I set the thickness, you can see on my drill bit, I set it so it only go this amount in, and that way I could use these dowels. So eventually this board is going to come out of the way, but this will go in to this board and set the dowel, but it has to match exactly perfect for this board. Exactly. For me to be able to join these two boards together, the dowels have to be in the exact same spot. So now that I've drilled this, the next thing I need to do is pull this board out of the way, secure this board in place up against this. This doesn't move, this form. This has to stay there. This board will go up against it. This board comes out, and then I drill from this side in through the exact same holes that are already set here, and that way it'll line these things up. I've already matched the end pieces here, so when this piece sits in here, you can tell that this piece right here, this is perfectly level right across. So that's what these things are set in. So I've got the end completely set. This piece stays put. I drill in this way, and that way it'll match the dowel holes up perfectly. Here you can see the first piece, I pulled it out of the form, and essentially I'll use wood glue, I'll pound these babies in. It's a 1 inch long, actually it's 1.5 inches long, so I'll pound them in 3/4 of an inch. That's all the farther they should go in. But once I get these set, and then I drill that piece using that form, it should mount up perfectly, and that way when the boards go together, it should make almost a perfect seam, or as perfect as I can possibly get it on here. It's gonna essentially look like this, but then it'll be joined together, and I'll have it glued, and it should stay fairly well together. And then I'll have to go along this edge, and I'll do some sanding, get it nice and flat as possible. You can still feel a little bit of an edge, depending on how it sets after I glue it. And then I will take some of this epoxy, this stuff right here, this mirror cast, 2-part epoxy, and similar to what I did here where I filled this gap, can't really see that, but these are actually divots in the wood, and I filled those with epoxy so you can see through. I'll fill this gap with just a little bit of an epoxy. That way it'll make it look smoother. Nothing will fall down in there, obviously, and it'll be smooth to the touch. And then once that's all done, final sanding, and then the staining takes place. Okay, here you can see I wasn't sure how much glue to squirt into these holes to get them started. And this one I put just a little bit in, and you can see I tapped all the way in. It's just barely squeezing out along the edges. This one I put a little bit more in, and that's a little more like it. Now another thing I'll probably do is put a wrench on here. I don't want to ground it up too much, but if I can twist this, that way I work the glue in a little bit more, I think that's going to be just about right. But I can always scrape off the excess glue, and I am going to put a bead of this wood glue along here as well. But definitely the dowel's got a hold. Okay, now it's the moment of truth. Now I'm going to tap these together and see if I've got it lined up enough. I don't have to bend them all the way in, but they have to be lined up enough that it's going to work. And you know what? It looks like it's going to do it. Tap it on this. They all are lined up. Yeah, they're all lined up enough that it's going to work out great. So the next step for me is to take this back apart, do the old Gorilla Glue, and pound this baby together, clamp it down, and let it sit at least for 24 hours. And then the next stage of sanding will begin. This was probably the most stressful part right here. Oh my God, that's ridiculous. Alright, let's take a look at how it turned out. I put the pegs together, glued it together. I actually had to use this ratchet strap to get it really close. The last little bit, I don't know if it's because the glue was hardening on me, or if maybe there's a chance I didn't drill the peg holes quite deep enough. I added an extra 1/8 of an inch on the drill holes on either side just to make sure that that wasn't a limiting factor. You can see I got the seam pretty good there. Here it's pretty good. Here it's good. And on this end, it's just a little out of alignment. And when I first put it together, I actually had a little bit of an edge. It was really difficult to get this thing perfectly level, but it was really close. The main thing is all the dowels lined up and went together. So I got a solid piece. It's actually pretty level, and I used the sander to take off the high spots. So now when you run your hand across this, it's really level. I'm now going to take this 2-part epoxy. I'll mix up a little batch, and then I'll put just a little in this seam to fill it. What I'll have to do is actually tape up the sides and the bottom part all the way along the edge with this kind of tape. That way it seals it. Mix up the stuff. I'll drip the epoxy in here. It'll fill it up, harden. 24 hours, and then it'll go through. It's the same stuff I put in here. It'll harden, and then I will sand that off. And once that's done, then that's the dog. Hi, Holly. Once that's done, I will do any finishing sanding because I use some kind of rough stuff to really grind off this. But I'll do the finishing sanding, and then I will actually I'll start putting the stain on it. Okay, I'm in the final stages. I used this epoxy. I had a little left and then I ran out, so I had to actually buy a little more of this epoxy, which kind of sucks, but I had to fill this crack all the way down. There was a couple of gaps, and the first time I did it, I didn't use good enough tape, and part of it leaked out, so I had to seal the bottom using this Gorilla Glue right there And then once I sealed the bottom, then this would actually hold the remainder of that mirror cast. And then of course you have to put tape on the ends, and I used Gorilla tape. This stuff's actually, I wish I would have used it the first time. It would have been way better. Anyway, and you can kind of see that this has been filled now. There's a little bit remaining on the top. Once this all hardens, I can actually sand it off, and it'll sand off totally smooth. And then once it's all smooth and everything else is, actually everything else is level, if it's all smooth, then I'll start putting the urethane. I'll do a couple coats of that. Alright, so now I got this all filled with the epoxy. You can feel it the whole way. It feels proud. So everything is sealed. No more leaking out of the bottom. So I can take this tape off, and now next thing I'm going to do is sand, and I'll get rid of all of this actually epoxy off the surface, and you can see where you can see the yellowish stripe. All that's going to go away once I get done sanding, and then it'll leave just the seam filled. Just like all these other little seams right in here, they're all filled and smooth, and then it's just wood on top. So that is the next step. When I get done sanding, this will all look this color, and then I will be ready to start staining. So the sanding is just about done. I've taken off all of the epoxy, all down the seam. I got it all the way down. I was using an old 80 grit that actually I switched to a 120 grit because it was actually doing a little bit better. 80 with this softwood's a little bit too much. 120 seemed to be pretty good. It got the epoxy off, the high centered spots. But now I'm going to switch to my 220, and it's pretty smooth across here, but you can just feel a little bit. It's pretty much done. I'm going to put a couple coats of urethane on. It's going to take out most of those bumps, but I'm going to finish it all off with some passes. Probably spend 5 minutes on it with the 220, get it all nice and smooth. I don't want to run over this. These are all polished, so I've been avoiding these filled spots because I don't want to. You can see a little bit there that it's been hit. It should smooth out and gloss out once I put the urethane on because it'll fill those micro scratches, but I'm not 100% sure, so I'm just mostly staying away from it with the sander. I've gotten all the proud parts off, so finish off with 220 and then I'm done sanding. Okay, finally got stain time. I'm starting with the bottom, the underside first, just to make sure I'm happy with the stuff I'm using. It's a polyurethane. It's a clear semi-gloss, but even though it's clear, it'll still give you this kind of yellowish, slightly honey color, and that's actually what I'm going for. This is the yellow cedar when it's all sanded down, and it's almost whitish. But once you put a little bit of that polyurethane on, it actually gives it a little bit of honey color, darkens it up a little bit, brings out some contrast like that, which I think really turns out well. So you put a couple coats of this on. You put a coat, wait 3-4 hours, do a light sand with like 220 grit, let it clean, get it all cleaned up again, and then you do another coat. And it recommends doing 3-4 coats, something like that. It'll thicken it up, give it a nice hard glossy finish, a little bit of depth to it. So that's my plan, but I'm going to do the underside first, make sure I like it, and then if I'm good to go, I'll flip it over on the other side and okay, now I'm ready to put stain on the top. I did the bottom already, and you can see definitely the contrast. This is polyacrylic right here, and that's also clear gloss. This stuff kind of looks like milk, and it goes on milky, but it actually dries totally clear. And this stuff gives a nice, durable, hard finish. Same thing, do 3 or 4 coats of that, but this won't give you any added color. It won't actually change the color of this at all, and I want the more yellowy color. So I'm gonna do a coat of that, let it dry, and then I'll probably do 3 or 4 coats of that. And you wanna do light sanding in between each coat.